Cue audio. All right, so we're about 5 minutes out. Second. All right, so we are 5 minutes out. We'll be starting in 5 minutes. Right.
No way, not again.
Yeah, everybody's online. Thank you for being here. My last, not my last class, but my middle class, I think is what it was. Did I have anybody there today? I may have been talking to myself. I was talking to myself because I went and I sat down. I was like, I'm gonna wait till somebody answers. They answered though. So it was good for them. Otherwise, I'd been really, really sad. All right. So we are. Did we make it through this chapter? I thought we did.
Yes,
Okay.
I think so.
That's what I thought.
I think we're now on 10.
Excellent. I popped out a whole bunch of stuff for this class. You pop out.
It's just at that point in the semester where everyone gets tired.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It is definitely that time of year. Oh my goodness. That fall break was nice, but my goodness, did it go by fast.
I'm a senior. I'm like, oh my gosh, the ending is just right there, just right there.
Is it going on for advanced or?
As I work for them.
Yeah.
So
Where do you work at?
I work for their emergency management
Oh,
department.
nice. Yeah, they should pay for something. That's awesome. Cool. Oh,
It's their scholarships already, so I don't see why they wouldn't.
yeah.
But still. Is Blackboard down or?
I was able to get it going, but it's with all the issues I had last week. I won't test it anyway. Does it work for me? I don't know. For everybody else, I certainly don't know. I'll be right back. Staying stuff. We are 1 minute out. No, 2 minutes out. Dose. Yeah. One minute left. Send them away. No, I'm just kidding. This. This. Looks like the first thing we need to talk about today is to get a concept of standing. Start. Mint. Boom. Huh. I think that's where we'll start. So, welcome to class, everyone. Hopefully, you guys are having a great day. Let's see, let's move this so I can see it back here. Let's see, things going on in the world. I don't know, you guys tell me what's going on in the world.
You can't do that.
Just looking at you. So in terms of stuff I've heard going on, if you guys want to chime in online, feel free to. It was, let's see, crazy stories that I've heard about. Someone reminded me, I think it was my methods class, about Puff Daddy being in the news. You heard anything about that? Okay, so my son's actually the one who told me about this originally. He did it through a meme, and it was really offensive, but it's also funny at the same time. So it was, how many dudes could Puff Daddy diddle if Puff Daddy diddled dudes? Kind of thing. Apparently, he's involved in a whole bunch of human trafficking stuff and all that. It's the entertainment industry. You're throwing around all that money, all those parties that they throw. It's like, what do you think they were doing? Yeah, and so it's like, yeah, apparently Hollywood's in free fall, I guess. I don't know. I just heard about that. I heard that meme was just like, oh my goodness, that's almost as good as how many Rob Lowe's could Rob Lowe rob if Rob Lowe couldn't Rob Lowe's. Oh, that one's horrible. That's my favorite one. But in here, what we need to get moving into is chapter 10. So we've been moving on the exclusionary rule. As this chapter starts moving into not exceptions so much as situations where it doesn't apply. And that's a little bit different than exceptions. Exceptions are like, here's where it should apply, but we're going to make a caveat here. Here's where it doesn't necessarily apply at all. But before we get into that, I wanted to talk about this thing real quick. I realized I don't think we talked about that earlier in the semester, and it's something that's actually kind of important. In the slideshow, I share it here. I was a little surprised they did this. Let's see here. Hopefully in the book defines this a little bit better than what it did here, because if you look at chapter 10, it says where it doesn't apply the exclusionary rule. First thing it talks about under the next slide, there we go, defines standing for Fourth Amendment purposes. And then when you get into the actual past the learning objectives, it didn't give me the definition there. And so we probably should have to talk about what the standing is in general and then talk about what it means for Fourth Amendment stuff. So standing basically means you have some type of grounds to file a claim. I don't know. This one's a little bit political, I guess, just because of current climate kind of stuff. Last election season, 2020, that was in the middle of COVID, all that stuff. There were a number of lawsuits as a result. One of them in particular was one that's the most troubling of them all. If you think back to 2020, was whenever I think it was Texas sued Ohio or Pennsylvania. I can't remember which one now, but it was that lawsuit. Because if you look at it, what ends up happening is when a whole bunch of states join in, they make the decision on that based on this. That's different than this, right? So you have standing, you have the merits of the case, you have a whole bunch of other issues. So merits are like the arguments of justification. Standing is whether or not you have grounds to, like you've been harmed, you have justification for seeking remediation kind of thing. That one I'll talk about real briefly because it's funny is what it is. It's just funny. Because if you look at, I wanted to say it was Pennsylvania, but I might be mistaken. Essentially what happened there was we had COVID and both sides of the political party agreed to make changes to its constitution, but they did not follow constitutional procedures. And so because of that, because they did that and both sides agreed to it, whenever it came time for the results, the side that lost lodged the argument, hey, we had a whole bunch of constitutional violations here. What are we going to do? That point in time, they looked at it like, well, you really don't have any standing here. You both both parties were in agreement for this. Once you get the results, you start looking at it and identifying these problems. Yeah, it's kind of true. So at that point in time, that's where I think society kind of fractured right there. People that did that. It's like you were working together, although you had your own purposes kind of thing. And then from there it went way off. Because if you decided on the merits, they're there. You did not follow constitutional procedures. And that's why sometimes you'll find that in Supreme Court cases, when they get brought up, what they'll do is they'll decide an issue on something like this rather than the issue, or they'll decide on a different merit. I think a good example of that one. Well, the first one that comes to mind is way off topic from here. It's gonna be more along the lines of I don't know what class I'd fall into. You may remember 6 years back, there was some talk about guy baking cakes for a gay wedding and refusing to. Yeah. Basically what happened with that one is they're trying to define the line between what's discriminatory practices and what's freedom of choice from both sides. Customer and what would you say?
Paper.
Yeah. And so you got those two things going on. And so whenever that case went up, they decided, oh, neither of those issues. It was his treatment throughout the trial processes the whole way there. Since they're outside of the standard due process, boom, they kicked it out. So it didn't decide the issue at all. They just kicked it down the road. And so anytime we're talking about Supreme Court rulings and stuff like that, realize that that's sometimes part of it. That's another way you can have cases that come through that should plug right into the issue that we're having, but they don't. And so it's one of those things to be aware of. And so standing, very, very important. You're going to want any type of filing. But Fourth Amendment, what it means is that you had that deprivation. Yeah, that'd probably be the right word. A deprivation of it. And so when we're talking about confessions or one's right to a lawyer, no Miranda. If you have questions, particularly if you're in custody or you've already inserted your Fifth and Sixth Amendment privileges, that's a violation. That's immediately what you're looking at for it to be violated. How is it you know when you've had your Fourth Amendment rights deprived?
Procedures, so anytime that they're collecting evidence and you don't have a warrant.
Search and seizure. It's actually more refined than that. It's one that yeah, everything basically tangible. And so what you get here is you get this. Movement. This one's only about speaking. This one's movement. When you wander into this territory, it's free to leave. It's the big question, right? That's the question that, depending on how the context presents itself, person's behaviors, everybody's behaviors, really, you can make a determination about whether or not you're free to leave. If the average person make the determination that you are not free to leave, you have been seized. And so that's where that initial standpoint comes in. And so from the get-go, that's probably the bounding kind of concept here. Where are you at and how did you approach this initial person kind of thing? So in some ways, like if this were procedures, you spend the first part of the semester on this because it's everything initial. This one is a little bit different because it's evidence. Let's see what this thing says because I don't remember where it goes from here because I can go on for quite a while about that. And I don't necessarily need to. Civil cases, proceedings. Yeah, we'll come back to that in a second. Stop that. I hate that one slide doesn't move right. So basically what you find out from here, where we'll come up next is since this is typically your initial kind of encounter for any type of incident or any type of action, it sets the stage for everything. So that person is free to leave. Then, well, anything that happens there is this right here. Right? What you end up looking at the policing side is it's not just, for the police officer, it's not just this question, it's also where are you standing kind of thing, because if you're standing in some type of protected place, then you have no right to be there. If you stop someone to get that kind of access, you have no right to do so. As long as you got probable cause, you got the full right to do so. You got the probable cause to make this seizure and you ask questions and they give consent, you're good to go. You don't have that probable cause and they give consent, doesn't matter. You violated the rights. And so that's one of those things that it sets the framework out. Let's see, consent of searches in persons and residents. So that's one of the first initial things. And then, of course, this thing gets more and more complex as you go, just like it always does. Let's see. We'll talk about abandonment, good faith here in a second. We talked about good faith last time, but here those distinguish it from an honest mistake. I'm not assuming honest mistake. That's one we'll get into it there because it's very low level threshold kind of thing. There, still not moving. Oop, there we go. Okay. Where the exclusionary rule does not apply, civil cases, because those are criminal in nature, or not criminal in nature. That's why it doesn't apply. They're not the same kind of thing. Situations where consent was given by a party with standing. Okay, so there's a different type of standing there. There's a little bit more interpretation of that aspect of it. Meaning that recognizes court as having standing to consent. That's a little bit of a different thing. We'll talk about who can consent to what here in a second. From there, mentions private searches. I think I mentioned that one last time. These rules only apply to the government. And since they only apply to the government, they don't apply to you and I. So I don't need probable cause to go in somebody's house. Right? If I do, though, it's probably criminal. Right? And so that's the danger that's associated with this. As soon as you move into that territory, distinguishing yourself is not good. Yeah. Let's do it. Who is harmed in the That's excellent. Good. I just saw that. I need to pop that up over here so I can see if anybody else chats because it doesn't notify me. All right. So private searches, private persons, separate than government, separate than anyone who's under the influence of government. That includes informants and that kind of stuff too. It's pretty interesting thing. They're treated just as agents of the government. Let's see if moves into consent next. Okay. We've already talked about this. The exclusionary rule talks about its limits there. It's like what it does is it is only for the purpose of deterring police misconduct, meaning that if it does not do so, whatever action won't be prohibited. Right? That's a weird way of putting it, meaning that only ways that will clearly address police misconduct are the purview of this. Right? That's why you have the exclusions or the exceptions, such as good faith, right? Because that's not going to affect police misconduct. They're doing their business as they're supposed to. That's why it's an exception. Yeah, that's about all I need to say. Most cases, direct beneficiary of the rule is someone who would have been convicted, right? So this is the weighing of freedom versus guilt and one's individual rights, because at this point in time, it's like that evidence we keep out would establish guilt. So we're literally weighing freedom is more important than guilt there in our society. As repeatedly held, the excluding rule is restricted to those areas where remedial objectives are most efficaciously, efficaciously served. So it's just about the benefit. Okay. Basically, all it means is anything you do in violation is admissible, whether misconduct, certain types of mistakes, purposeful. Exclusionary rule doesn't apply to people. We already talked about that. Is there anything related? Pertinence there, privy. No. Yeah, that really doesn't matter. Basically, what it says here related private parties is, what you do is you open yourselves up to criminal liability. That's why I mentioned the thing about clean hands. If you come out looking clean at the other end, then you're not going to be criminally prosecuted. However, it's like there's play there. Who you're dealing with, what types of crimes and all that stuff. That's going to be something that someone at some point will look at and individually way. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if I want to talk about that part just yet, because what I want to do is I want to talk about, is it going to go into application, private search? Okay, that's where it starts getting into consent, because it really needs to start getting into consent a little bit earlier. Okay, so here's where it talks about evidence taken in a burglary case. If it's taken with another person in cooperation with the police, motion denied. So here's what they started doing. An appeal court reversing person's original entry into the defendant's room was purely a private search, was instigated by the police. So that's what they're talking about there. Is at that point in time, actions of a governmental agent. You yourself become a governmental agent at the point in time you turn informant, where you go and you effectively for them. Particularly if you're doing so after being in contact with them. You do it on your own beforehand. That's one thing, because you might not be aware of the dangers or all the issues associated with it. So you have a little bit of naivety, maybe, might give you a little bit of protection. But if you go and talk to them first and then go do it, yeah, that's not going to go anywhere. Make it in. Looks like it. Okay. Search by defendant persons by armed security was a private search. So that's relatively recent. Same thing for security guards. They are not governmental agents. Right? That's why they're so dangerous, because to some degree they've been given some measure of that authority with that role, but no attachment to government. There we go. I already talked about that. Yeah, just it can be used in a civil case. It's one of those things that's funny about the you should say reciprocity between systems. If you get convicted in criminal court, you don't have to go to civil court. There's a civil case against you, you lost, right? Same thing with civil stuff. If there's parameters that apply to criminal court, they don't necessarily apply to the civil side. Okay. Private person in a private capacity, that's when it's private search. Right? Idea to obtain initiated by another private, well, with a private person, right? And so there's kind of gives you the distinction. What you're going to do is you're going to have to do it with the origination of that idea. It's really what you start tapping into. It's the same thing with entrapment, right? Where did the idea come from? Is that your idea or is that someone else's idea you're acting on? Okay. Yeah. Consent. Okay. So with consent, there's a few interesting things with this one. Because who matters and what matters? When, how, I guess, matter too.
Is another question.
It's like, could
The police farm out search and seizures to a private security agency to get around the Fourth Amendment?
informally, they probably could, but if you did it on scale where you're getting numbers, then that wouldn't work. We'll pick up on the pattern. That's the exact idea behind the silver platter doctrine, right? That's very, 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 very possible. It's like, yeah, you could do it, but the problem is if you do it at scale or with any regularity, people pick up on it. People are smarter than what you think, really. Particularly if you're aimed at somebody trying to be criminal, they'll figure it out, right? And so it's a balancing act a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily do it that way, but do realize that your citizenry is the source of all information, right? All knowledge, all problems come from that same kind of source when it comes to policing. So to some degree, it's who starts what and who's pushing it, right? If it's the population pushing it, that's that. If it's the police pushing the population to go after certain people, that's a different thing. That one's pretty nasty. Here's where things get kind of fun. So it mentions here it has 2 requirements. Technically, it's 3 because it needs to be, they need to understand what they're doing, what they're actually consenting to, because there's going to be certain parameters to that. Voluntariness, that's going to be the key one. It's not forced, it's not anything like that. The third one, apparent authority, is where we'll talk about in a second. So the first one's going to be the scope. So when we start giving consent to search something or consent for stuff, it's like under the understanding, the common understanding of the scope of what it is you're talking about, isn't always readily apparent, right? If I said, yeah, you can have a look around, is that like a look around, or is that like I'm going to go in here and just opening things up and getting into it, right? That's one way that things can get a lot more intense, right? The resolution. I started really focusing in on different stuff. It's one way. Another way that scope is important is like how wide, right? So if I give a consent to search, my house, does it include the garage? Right? Is the garage attached? Yes, maybe no. If I consent to search the car, does it include the trunk? Oh, maybe not. Depends. How secure is the trunk? Right? Is it one that there's something inside the trunk that's locked up and that it's really locked up? Because that's going to be a second consent probably. Hey, can you open that up for me? No. Yes. Whatever. Right? And so there's that scope that's going to be understood too. They didn't get that one as well here. Parent authorities where things get really fun though, because who can give you permission to do what? Right? Because this is where things get a little bit messy. You guys lived on campus before, with other people before, something like that. How does it work over in the dorms? Yeah, it's not quite easy to tell, is it? Basically, we start looking at our common areas versus kind of private areas, and making those distinctions becomes very, very, very difficult. How they do it here is they use actual or apparent authority being the key thing there. The case that had to do with that one was, I can't remember the name of it, but I can remember the details of this. Was funny. It was one where female was contacted the police related to something, had to get into an apartment, had keys to it. In the process of it, she's got keys to this apartment. She's asking for help moving something, I think is what it was. And she notifies police officers, hey, there's a whole bunch of evidence over here that's criminal. Oh, that's drugs. She says, yeah, that's my husband's or ex-husband's or whatever it was. Similar situation that story from the other day. Only this one, guy's not there. She doesn't live there either. She just has a key. She's just a random person with the keys, and we trust with the key. Yeah, that's enough. That looks like you have the authority to give over consent to that area. And so that's where that line is drawn. She had access to something that technically she shouldn't have, but given the circumstances of the situation, every reasonable person would have assumed that, yes, they had that authority. But no, they didn't. Still can use it because it's not going to deter any misconduct if you prevent that. And so that's kind of how that works.
How did that play out?
Oh yeah, he got convicted. Yeah. It's one of those things that the presence of no and a yes together, no stands. You only have the yes stands. You do something to change it to make it where it's only a yes, that's no good. But if it's presented to you, gift wrap like that, yeah, you can take it. Because that one's basically gift wrap. The way it works with like here on campus, it'd be those common areas, it'd be like the kitchen, those kind of things. Then you get off into like your own rooms, or if you got like private areas, someone can call them out as distinct, then you can start to make that argument. But it gets really, really, really difficult. I mean, if you really get in the policing side, it's like whenever they start to consent to stuff or the links of searches, it's really one of those ones that to some degree play it by ear, but there's where some of the boundaries are. Like with searches, if you're doing a search of a person, typically you can search the area around the person too. How far? Usually it's about wingspan, right? So somewhere generally within arm's reach, because those are the areas I can access to hide something. You go 3 rooms over, like that might not be the same thing. It's different. Okay. Yeah. Person giving consent may limit search area. After giving consent may revoke consent. Consent is not needed in the premises if there are exigent circumstances together. Let's see what else. Yeah. Would that fall under good faith? Depends. It really depends. That's basically what happened with the apparent authority, was it fell under good faith. And so that's really what it is. It's you have to look at the number of factors that stack up on either side. And once you have that, it's, okay, then you know, is that going to be purview the person's acting correctly or not? We start talking about consent. The nature of it is, well, like it is everywhere else, it's time bound. It's limited in scope. It's limited in terms of your active participation. Once you give it away, it's not gone forever. You can take it right back, right? Sure, you can look around. Whoa, what are you getting over there? No, not so much. You can go back outside now. That kind of, unless he's got probable cause or she's got probable cause at that point in time, and then ain't nothing you're gonna say gonna do anything, right? And so that, being aware of that. It's sort of like that freedom of movement thing. How do you tell if you are actually free? It's a reasonable person's understanding of the situation. And at the same time, if you test it, what happens? Free to leave? Oh, they might not answer. It's typically when they won't, because that's a clear legal distinction. And if they don't have enough grounds, they won't say anything. Even if they do have grounds, it's better if they don't say anything, right? Because that's a question you could have later that you could lodge, right? A weakness in that encounter, maybe. You just take off running, you'll find out real fast, right? If they don't have anything, whatever. If they got something, ow, right? You're getting tackled. Ugh. That's not fun either. That always hurts. Okay. These acts in full accordance with the law when they ask citizen for consent. Reinforce the rule of law, citizen advises the police of his or her own wishes. Spells the inferences of coercion. Okay. There's a few things I want to talk about there. So you have the consent aspect. This is the thing I'm going to talk about. This is what I really want to talk about. So it talks about the reinforcement of society here. The knowing the asking for consent and the being able to speak it kind of thing. That's an important element there, right? And that exchange, that's what really identifies that strength or weakness of that encounter kind of thing. What I would say there, one easy way, one thing they're kind of addressing, but they're not really addressing, the difference between that Fourth and Fifth Amendment stuff, Miranda. I have to tell you your Miranda rights. I don't have to tell you, you can say no to the search. If I do, though, that means you are aware of the fact that you have the ability to say no. So that means that yes is so much more solid, so much better. And because of that argument there that it was coercion or force or something like that goes away to some degree. I also want to say something on the other side. What's that? Is being handcuffed. It depends on yeah, generally if you're being arrested, you're gonna be put in cuffs unless it's something that's like really low level. The thing I was gonna say was one that's kind of situational. But my favorite one to give you an understanding of just how situationally bound that determination is. Like, okay, I'm standing in, we'll say, town square. 3 officers walk by, approach me, kind of thing. Might cause nerves, might not. Okay, take that same situation. You have 3 officers approaching. Now you're in a dark alley in an inner city area. It's like all of a sudden people start looking at that differently. If you're in an alley, there's less points of escape. You got 3 officers engaged, heading towards you at one point in time, and it's not an area where there's going to be a lot of people. And so just because of that, just because you just moved that one location, the nature of that thing changes. I won't get into it too heavy. It's more procedures thing. I'll be talking about what is it? Not crime prone locations. There's another phrase for it. Not hot spots. High crime places. That's what they call it over on this side. If a place is deemed as high crime, that's one of the factors you can use to establish probable cause. So it's like, that's a big circle argument, but it's there. And so, yeah, good ways to do it, bad ways to do it. Okay. Objection by a non-cohabitants, make non-consensual. Yeah, that's what I've already talked about. The fine line for third-party consent. The areas where this starts to change, maybe it's a standing right privacy, where it starts to change the nature of these relationships. When you have multiple people consenting, this assumes that they're in somewhat kind of imbalance. That's not always the case. Sometimes you can have things like this. Right? Parent child, some type of superordinate subordinate relationship. And so in those types of situations, what you end up with is, well, disparate treatments for yeses and nos across those groups. That'd be like boss employee, school administrator, student kind of thing, all that kind of stuff. I think they get into some of the student stuff for 8 through 12, I think, on this chapter. But we'll see here in a second. Standing, yeah. Succeed in a motion to express evidence must show that certain rights were violated, but not some rights on the person that you particularly have standing. Yes, in this case, it's that reasonable expectation of privacy. Okay. Talks about that reasonable expectation of privacy, makes up both reasonableness and what it is to be private, right? So those are two elements there. It's what I should say, three really. You have that reasonable, the expectation, and what it is to be private. If you look at privacy itself, it's not a constitutional right that's specifically enumerated. Most of your books will tell you that that's going to be a number, basically an overlap of first, third, fourth, and a few other constitutional amendments are what actually create the concept of privacy. So that's kind of an interesting thing. It's not literally there. Reasonable expectation of privacy exists only if they actually expect privacy and it's reasonable. So reasonable meaning most people in society would recognize that it's private. You expect it to be private. That's the one thing that's kind of interesting because that's going to be more contextually bound. How are you carrying yourself? What are you doing? Where are you at? What are you doing? You're screaming on the phone at the top of your lungs at somebody. That's not a private conversation, right? That kind of a thing. They did not do particularly well with this as telephones and all that stuff existed. First cases there, I think we're actually with Bell. I'd have to look. I actually forgot the name of the telephone. It was a policing student, different class from mine. That's going to be Olmsted. Let's see. There's a couple others. They're probably referencing in here. Basically, what happened there was, okay, now we've got technology. You're having this private conversation. Yeah, but that conversation is not staying in your home. It's leaving your home. It's traveling 30 miles out this way, hitting the switchboard, then going another 60 miles out this way. And so literally, if you've ever seen any old depictions of switchboards, the big boards slot something else in, that's literally how it worked. And so listening into somebody was that easy. And so how hard was it for police to do that? What's going on over here? Right? And one, it was easy. Two, there's no infringement into a place that was listed. Person, places, house, effects, papers. That's not any of those. Not something real. It's something that's buried in the wind. So for decades, that one did not count as an invasion of privacy. They could listen to anything you said. It wasn't until the 60s they got, hey, those conversations, those things themselves were private. That's literally how that worked. That was cats, if I remember correctly. And that's one where technology is going to keep doing that. There'll be a chapter later in the book we talk about technology stuff, though. So I won't go too heavy into that. Intrusion into a right of privacy. The officer can show authority to make the search. The intrusion is lawful. And so that's what it is. It's that interaction. Thank you. You have the right to privacy and phone booth. Old school question. Depends on how loud you're talking. It's really what it is. If you're going to be in a phone booth, you have all the rights to privacy that you would if you were on your cell phone, if you're anywhere else, any conversation you have. But it's really going to vary between on how loud you're talking. Right? How are you carrying yourself? How many people are you around? Are you trying to carry yourself as if you're having a private conversation? That's what it was. Yeah.
So In one of my media classes, it talks about how journalists are able to obtain information
Mhm.
in a public area.
Mhm.
What if situational? What if you hear like you're a cop or like, and you're not working at that moment,
Mhm.
you hear that something's going on, you're like, oh my goodness, but you didn't really receive the information, but you got the information.
Yeah.
Does that work?
You can use that. It would just be one of those things that it would depend on what exactly it was that you heard, and like how you used it really. Um, and so that's one if it's like a tip off, it's really, really, really specific. You'd probably have to work that to where you have reasonable grounds to show that it's separate, basically, because that's one that there's no real way to test the informant's tip, that kind of stuff. And so that's it's an interesting question because here's how that works. Whenever you get into tips and that kind of thing, typically what they look for is aspects of it they can corroborate. And so what kinds of things can you corroborate to show that that tip is accurate so you can use it as evidence to justify actions? And so with something like that, one, you wouldn't have any documentation to show that this information was picked up there unless you'd have to like write up a report, probably something like that. I don't know if they'd ever want to use information like that. Just like keep it to yourself and find a better way to put a better source to be able to put it into the paper kind of thing. That's typically how that I would think that would be handled. But yeah, when it comes to the old rule, this is outside of the text. The old rule for informants was you had to check both the informant and their information. You had to verify both. So it's the two-prong rule of Wheeler Spinelli. That got replaced with totality of the circumstances. That's with most everything in this whole area. What that means is everything can matter, right? Everything, the totality, even the color of the carpet in the room, kind of thing. It's like that back that level of specificity. Now, some effect at some point. If it has a bearing on the case, then you can use it. And that's what that means. Yeah. Okay. And so this is identifying the trade-off for that invasion of privacy. It's on probable cause. All right. Expectation of privacy is not limited to permanent residents, but also includes rental homes, automobiles, that kind of stuff. There's actually a few cases related to that one. You start getting with vehicles. Basically, what you need to know there is they're mobile, right? And since they're mobile, that Fourth Amendment process only has on there for warrants. How long does it take to get a warrant? How long does it take me to drive out of the county? Right. And so that's why that was like that thing back 1920s, rum runners, all that kind of stuff. The bootlegging is what really pushed that. Examples of right to privacy: employees' workplace, hotel room, storage lockers, overnight guests, owners of vehicles. Okay. So when that right to privacy kicks in, it's interesting because it doesn't always work like what you think. Like the employees in the workplace thing realize that you're dealing with someone else's location, someone else's stuff, that kind of a thing. So your privacy here is pretty limited. Hotel rooms, storage lockers, that kind of stuff. That's where it gets interesting. So how can I tell the difference between hotel I'm renting to live out of and a hotel I'm using to run human trafficking out of? Should I treat that hotel the same way in both of those situations? Maybe yes, maybe no. And so that's one of those things that's a little harder to make that distinction. How should we? How do we? We do treat them a little bit differently. And that's going to have to do with that line right there, overnight guests. I don't know how well this book will make that out, but that's that distinction as to whether or not it's treated like a residence or whether it's just like a public building kind of thing. Not quite public, but some other type of building. Is that has an extra level of protection once home. If you really get into it, your home is one of your most protected things. Ideally, it should be you yourself as a person. You go out in the world and then you start engaging with this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, somebody's gonna touch somebody, something like that, right? But it's police searches and that kind of thing. So it's like, yeah, that limitation's not really there. It's got to do with that overnight. You stay there overnight. That's where that kicks in. You're actually using it like a residence. Coming in drug trafficking too. They'll use like apartments or residences for manufacturing, distributing, that kind of stuff. And so that's a good way to get fast on it. Owners of vehicle, not passengers in a vehicle. Expectation of privacy. I'm trying to remember where that would go from there. Kind of give you an idea for how vehicles work. Oh, I don't know if I want to get into that just yet because I know it's going to come into that in a second. We'll hold off on that one. If they move, notice you have multiple people in there. And so if you've got a driver, a passenger, and all that going on in a vehicle, you got passengers saying no and a driver saying yes. Go with yes. The owner thing, I'd have to look into that and see how that one adds into the mix. Because if you got the owner there, but someone else is driving, I think it still would be the driver that would default it because they're the one operating the vehicle. But I'd have to double check that one. Yeah. And so here's where we start getting into the fun stuff, though. So this is areas where exclusionary rule doesn't apply. Consent's one big branching area. It can still apply depending on what has transpired leading up to that consent. But if everything's been on par, you have that consent. No rules, not no rules, but no limitations, nothing's going to be excluded. The next one's abandonment. So this is the one that's fun. Like, it's funny because it's the same thing for things like it is people. And so, I don't remember if I put this in here or not. If I had someone walk into the room and I said, hey, stop. They keep walking. What's happening? Nothing. They stop. They're now seized by our governmental agent because they complied. I told them to stop. They complied. That compliance may have been to some degree consensual, but no, they only did that because I said stop. And so that's how refined that line is for that seizure, right? Also, I told you to stop and I had no grounds to tell you to stop and you stopped. Now you're actually protected if you had something on you that shouldn't, right? Now I can't use it against you. But if you keep running, I don't get it. Right? And so there's a little bit of protection there, but there's a little bit of protection this way. Wait a second. What usually ends up happening is as you're running, you throw stuff. I lived in Chicago for a little bit. It was really funny because like you'd see that happen kind of regularly. Someone here goes to the parking lot again, and they're tossing drugs this way or whatever it is that way, and that kind of thing. And it's funny because as that's going through, of course, you have the incident people going back through and picking up whatever it was. First thing that gets asked. Now, is this yours? What do they say? No. That's this. That's abandonment. Right? When you get to abandonment, you say no. If there were any aspects of privacy still protecting it, you just gave it away. Right? At that point in time, if it were like a locked suitcase that they have no justification to get into, if you said, yeah, that's mine. Here you go. Can you open that? Can I look in it? No. Right? That's not mine. Okay, let me crack it open. Right? Because now it's nobody's property. We have to figure out whose it is. Oh, wait, that's yours. And that's how that works. Right? So it's that denial is one of those ways that they do that. Yeah, fleeing the scene. Here's what I talk about: fleeing the dream, throwing stuff away. Right? It can be cars, can be anything, but what'll happen is that throwaway is the direct or indirect result of illegal stop, then it's forbidden, right? So if I create the situation, I tried to stop you, no reason, you're throwing stuff and running. I didn't have a reason to stop you in the first place. You're good either way, right? If I did have a good reason to stop you, then I can use it. I still like that though. Is this your no? Because once you do that, then there is no privacy attached, so you give them that away. That's abandonment. Several users ran it under my car. Officer chased them on foot. Prior to being tackled, one of them threw crack cocaine. It was used. Yeah. Here's another one. Pills. Arrested. Was not unlawfully seized during the initial pursuit. Yeah. So denial of ownership. All right, privacy is tied into ownership. You're not an owner, then, well, no standing there. Different examples. Luggage, bags, luggage, satchel, an entire apartment, apartment, yeah. All kinds of things that can be abandoned. Here it talks about real estate. For purposes of real estate, it can't be abandoned in the literal sense. How are they found? It can be abandoned for Fourth Amendment purposes. Now we're starting to talk about locations. We'll probably get into, let's go trash first. Okay, trash. That expectation of privacy. When can you steal someone's trash? When it's put out on the curb. Well, you can do it for evidence collection, that kind of thing. I need to get DNA evidence from this person, see when is it going to be free for the public to just take it. I'm an agent of the government. I'm an agent of the public. You wait till it's out for collections. If it's up next to the house, you can't go get it. A couple of concepts we'll talk about. One of them is going to come up here in just a second. It's going to be curtilage, right? No expectation of privacy for plastic garbage bags left at the side of a public street, right? And they also have statutes for when vehicles are abandoned, that kind of a thing. Move a little faster. Here's where it gets into curtilage. So that is the phrase that you're looking for. It's the area around your home that has the same protections as your home, right? How can you determine if the area around your home is protected like your home is? There's a few factors that you look at, right? So is it actually a private area, the curtilage, only the area right next to your house is? That distance is going to be determined by actual distance from your house that you're trying to go and establish it, the nature of its use, the steps you've taken to conceal it from public view. Are there any like fencing or other ways you try to section it off to kind of enclose it to make it more private? Those are the factors that are going to come in that you're going to have to weigh to establish that, okay, this area is included with the house. This area is not, right? That's how they do it case by case. Basically, what you start running into is there's some interesting things. You have that walk and talk principle. You can walk to somebody, you can walk to someone, talk to them. While you're there, you're technically inside of that curtilage. However, you start getting into an area where you can't touch anything unless you've got justification. So probably move into plain view next. Curtilage extends home. Yeah, depends. Reference factors whether individual reasonably expect an area to remain private. Here, proximity to the home included basically fenced in, natures, and concealment. Open fields. All right, so here's the two big ones. I'm surprised I went down first. Open fields and plain view. Probably the two biggest facets of this thing, because open fields, there is no expectation of privacy. Doesn't matter how many no trespassing signs, how fenced off you have it. Doesn't matter at all. That barn that's out in the middle of the meadow out on your property is not private. Police can walk into it anytime they want. If you can, go after a trespasser who's in there, that's just fine. You can go after them and charge them for trespassing. It's a police officer, even if they have no legal justification for being in there, you don't get to do anything. Right? That's how that works. That flies in the face of what most people think. They think if I put a fence up, I say no trespassing, private property, it is private. Absolutely not. The only thing that's private is your home. Right? You got a farm, you got anything like that. It's like, ooh, no privacy. Yeah, they don't do that out of courtesy kind of thing, but if they got a reason to, they will. Right? They think that somebody's manufacturing drugs. They can see that barn get raided pretty fast. Right? Doesn't take anything. There's no necessarily a search warrant needed. Walk up in and get see anything, call more police.
But is it like so not for the law enforcement side, but for citizens side?
Yeah, you're trespassing. You're gonna get
I'm
trouble.
like,
Yeah. We have it's a whole special set of treatment there. Yeah, it's literally that. Same thing with the civilian arrest kind of thing. Citizen arrest. It's like, ooh, don't do it. Don't do it. You can do a whole lot of good, but it's gonna be bad to yourself. It's like that's exactly what it is. And the other one, plain view. We'll talk about that one more next time on Wednesday. That one is different from open fields in that plain view is sight only. You can only look. You can only touch after you've determined something is criminal, right? That's the limitation. So it's like, I'm in that curtilage area. And touch you, you can knock on the door, right? If I'm off in the barn though, I can rifle through everything. And I actually had some friends who live out in the country, but like, yeah, we went out there and just one time, there's a whole bunch of police officers out there just going through the thing. That'd be creepy. Yeah. What's going on here? Yeah. Your kid wasn't. Yes, it was. Kid was my friend. Yeah, he's anyhow. But with that, we'll pick up with what is the next slide? Open field stuff. We'll pick up with that next class. And if y'all have any questions, let me know. Do not forget that I popped out a couple more quizzes. I know I was a little bit behind on some of those, but remember, those are all multiple attempts. I think each one's an hour. And what they'll do is they'll prep you for the questions that are on the exam related to those chapters. So test, retest, it saves the highest grade. So have fun. With that, I will see you all on Wednesday. Have a great day. I'm out of here. Audio.